Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. So this is going to be the part 2 of building our own HTTP proxy server from scratch. So in this video, we are going to build the basic functionality of a HTTP proxy server, where it is going to receive the HTTP request from the clients, and the proxy server is going to parse this HTTP request and extract the destination server address. Then the proxy server is going to create a new TCP connection to the destination server, and it is going to initiate a new HTTP request and send to the destination server. Now, once the server receives this HTTP request, the server is going to process that request and generates a HTTP response, and it responds back to the proxy server. Once the proxy server receives the HTTP response, it is going to create a new HTTP response and send it back to the client. Now there are two sockets that are going to be created. One is on this end and the other one is on this end. So we are going to maintain two socket connections, where one will be between the client and the proxy, and the other one will be between the proxy and the server. Now in this socket, our proxy server is going to act as the server, whereas in this region, our proxy server is going to act as the client. So this is the basic network flow that is going to happen in the backend. Now let's get started with the coding part. Our project name will be RFT HTTPS proxy, where I will be creating a new module called HTTP Proxy Engine, which consists of two files, server.py and parser.py. Server.py handles the sockets, like creating new sockets, connecting to posts, and then getting and receiving or sending data, closing sockets, etc. Next, it is going to use parser.py in between its functionalities, like parsing host and port details from a HTTP packet. Next, we are going to implement our HTTP proxy server, which has these basic methods. The init method accepts two arguments, host and the port number. You can change it according to your need. Next, we are going to define the start function. Start function is going In the start function, we are going to create a socket where we are going to bind the socket to the host and the port values that we have defined. And then we will be waiting for new incoming connections from the clients. So once we get an ETCP connection from the client, we will be creating a new thread for that client, for handling that client, and then we will handle that client via the handle client method. So in the handle client function, it's going to take the client socket as the argument, where it is going to receive the data from the client, which is the HTTP request. That HTTP request, we are going to use the parse request method, where it is going to extract details like host and port. We will be looking further on how are we going to code this parse request. Now, once we got the host and port details, we will be creating a new socket called the remote socket, and we will be sending all the data that we had from the client, like the HTTP request, to the origin server. Once we get the response back from the remote socket, we'll be using a relay data function, where we are going to take all the data that was sent by the remote socket to the client socket. So that means it's the reverse direction now. Once we send back the data back to the client, we'll be closing both the remote and the client sockets. Now this completes the TCP connections between client and proxy, and between proxy and the server. Now let's look into the functionality of HTTP parser. The parse request method is going to take the request data, which is HTTP request in our previous scenario. It is going to decode that HTTP request and then it's going to split it in multiple headers. We'll be taking the first line, first header, which will have the type of method, like it is whether is it a get request or a post request or a put, and then the URL, and then the protocol version, like whether it's a HTTP 1.0 or 1.1. And next, we will be using the URL split method, which comes with the URL lib, which we will be using it to parse the first name and the port. So by default, HTTP uses port 80, but there will be scenarios where the origin server is going to be running on a different port. So by default, if the port is none, we'll be assigning it 80. But if it's not none, that means the server is running on a different port and we will be assigning that particular port. So we will return these two details back to our handle client function, where the handle client is going to take these two values and make a request to the origin server. Now let's create the main.py where we are going to create a new object for our HTTP proxy server and then we are going to start the server. So let's run our Python code. So now our HTTP proxy server has started on port 8080. Those are the default values which I have specified. So I have opened a new private window of my Mozilla Firefox browser where, and in the connection settings I am configuring my proxy server. So it is listening on the same machines. I am using the local host. If you are using on a different machine, then on the same line, then you have to keep that IP. It starts maybe from 192, 168, like that, on port 8080. So currently I will keep it unchecked. We are not going to use for HTTPS. We are going to implement the functionality of HTTPS tunneling in the next video. And after that, we can also use for HTTPS proxy. So now we are going to use for HTTP proxy. So let's browse some HTTP HTTP websites. So there is a one server which is called http forever.com. So if you check here, we are able to view the site, and at the same time, in our proxy server, we are able to see whatever the domains that the browser is trying to reach for. Similarly, we will also be able to view all the contents in plain text because it is HTTP, not HTTPS. So in the next video, we are going to implement HTTPS tunneling so that we can use our browser to browse HTTPS sites. And on the proxy server, we will be able to view the domains that the user is trying to reach out for. We can view those logs simultaneously. See you in the next one.